He left me. He left me and our kids behind without a second thought while I was drowning in the wreckage of a life I thought was built on love. But what he didn't know was that his abandonment lit a fire inside me, a fire that would burn everything in its path. Now I'm a self-made millionaire, and he's left to watch from the sidelines, struggling. This is the untold story of how I turned his betrayal into the most powerful revenge. My name is Sarah, and I never imagined my life would turn out the way it did. Growing up, I believed in the fairy tale. Get married, have kids, build a life together, and grow old in each other's arms. I married Jake when I was 26. We had two beautiful children, Noah and Emma, and for a while, it seemed like everything was falling into place. I thought we were a team, that we'd weather any storm together, but what I didn't know was that Jake was already planning his exit long before things started falling apart. From the outside, our life looked perfect. We had a lovely house, both of us worked stable jobs, and we had a family that seemed to have it all. But beneath the surface, things were crumbling. I worked hard, tried to keep our home running smoothly, and balanced the demands of raising two kids with being a supportive wife. Meanwhile, Jake slowly started distancing himself. At first, it was small things, working late, spending more time with friends, and coming home exhausted. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One day, I found out just how off things were. Jake had been having an affair for months, and it hit me like a freight train. He wasn't just emotionally absent, he was physically gone, and it was all in plain sight. When I confronted him, he admitted it without remorse, and that's when the truth finally sunk in. He didn't care about our marriage, our family, or me. That moment was a turning point. I felt like my entire world had been shattered in an instant. The man I had trusted, built a life with, and made a family with, had decided that it wasn't worth it anymore. There I was, alone, heartbroken, and facing the daunting reality of being a single mother. I had always believed that we were a family that would stay together, but now I was left to pick up the pieces. Jake didn't just abandon me emotionally, he abandoned his kids. He made it clear that he wasn't interested in being a father anymore. No phone calls, no visits, no effort to even pretend that he cared. I felt completely betrayed. I had dedicated my life to him, to us, and now I was left to face the fallout. I remember sitting in our living room, Noah and Emma playing quietly, as I tried to make sense of everything. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so blind to the fact that the man I loved had been planning to leave me for someone else all along? I thought about the years I had sacrificed, trying to keep everything together for the sake of our family. And then I realized something painful but powerful. I had been living for everyone else, but not for me. I had put all my energy into making Jake happy, into being the perfect wife and mother. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of myself. I didn't know who I was outside of being a wife and a mother, and now I had to figure it out, alone. In the days and weeks after Jake left, I went through a whirlwind of emotions. There was anger, sadness, frustration, and confusion. But there was something else, something I didn't expect. As I looked at my children, I realized I had no choice but to rebuild. I couldn't stay stuck in the pain. I had to be strong for them. I had to show them that no matter what happened, they would never have to question their worth or their ability to thrive. And I had to prove to myself that I was capable of more than just surviving. I was capable of creating a life that was better than the one I'd been living before. It was in that moment that something shifted inside me. I realized that I had the power to change everything. I didn't have to live in the shadow of my past. I didn't have to keep replaying the story of my failed marriage. I could write my own story, one where I was the heroine, not the victim. And though the road ahead would be hard, I knew deep down that I was strong enough to face whatever came my way. The journey I was about to embark on wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be mine. And that was the first step toward the life I had always dreamed of. But I didn't know how much that would change, or how quickly it would all happen. The first few months after Jake left were the hardest of my life. I was living in a fog, not quite knowing how to navigate the new reality I had been thrust into. I had never expected to be a single mother, especially not in the way that I was. Jake didn't want to be involved. The responsibility of raising two kids fell entirely on me, and I was struggling to keep my head above water. Financially, emotionally, and mentally, I was drained. But in the midst of all the pain, there was a spark inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. That spark was the realization that I could no longer live in the shadow of my past. I had been relying on Jake for so long, thinking that everything would fall into place as long as we were together. Now I was forced to rely on myself, and while it terrified me, there was a deep, primal part of me that understood. This was my chance to rebuild my life from the ground up. I started small. I began looking for work, something that would allow me to pay the bills and take care of my kids. I knew it wouldn't be easy. My options were limited, and the job market wasn't exactly forgiving for someone who had spent most of her time focused on family rather than career. But I was determined to make it work. I applied to everything I could find: secretarial positions, part-time retail, anything that could give me a steady income. I wasn't picky. I just needed to do something to take care of my family. At first, the rejections were hard to bear. I applied to dozens of jobs and heard nothing back. But instead of giving up, I doubled down. I started networking, reaching out to people I knew, asking for advice and leads. Slowly, things began to shift. I found a part-time administrative assistant job at a small marketing firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. It wasn't going to make me rich, but it gave me something I desperately needed: independence. The first day of work felt like both a victory and a defeat. On one hand, I was proud of myself for getting a job. I was doing something to take control of my future. On the other hand, it was overwhelming. I hadn't worked in an office environment for years. The world had changed since I'd last been employed, and I felt like I was playing catch-up. But as the days passed, I began to find my rhythm. I was learning new skills, meeting new people, and most importantly, I was starting to feel like myself again. That was the first shift in my mindset. I realized that I didn't need Jake to succeed. I didn't need his approval or his presence to make my life worth living. I had 2 kids who depended on me, and that was enough motivation to keep moving forward, no matter how hard it got. But the real change came when I stopped viewing my job as something temporary. It was a stepping stone, yes, but it was also a lesson. I learned to manage my time, how to work smarter, and how to prioritize my own growth. I also realized something else, something that would change the trajectory of my life. The more I learned, the more I began to think about what I really wanted. The more I saw the potential in myself, the more I wanted to aim higher. I began to think about my future, not just as a mother struggling to survive, but as a woman who could thrive on her own. I started researching ways to build a career that would allow me to not only provide for my family, but also create a life of freedom and financial independence. I knew that if I could build something of my own, something that didn't rely on anyone else's approval or support, I could truly be free. So I did what any determined woman would do. I started looking into ways to invest in myself. I took courses, watched webinars, and read everything I could about entrepreneurship. I learned about online businesses, digital marketing, and investing. It wasn't an overnight transformation, but step by step, I started seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles. Every lesson, every failure, every tiny success fueled me to go further. It was in those early days, in the quiet hours after the kids had gone to bed, that I started to sketch out my plan. I was going to build my own business. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew it was the only way I could regain full control over my life. I wasn't just going to be a victim of my circumstances, I was going to rise above them. And just like that, my journey toward financial independence had begun. The road ahead was still long, but now I had a purpose, a mission, and most importantly, a belief in myself that I hadn't had in years. Jake might have abandoned us, but I was determined to prove that I didn't need him or anyone else to create the life I deserved. What I didn't know at the time was that this was just the beginning of a transformation that would change everything. Once I committed to building my own business, I knew there was no turning back. The next few months were a blur of research, sleepless nights, and countless hours spent figuring out how to make this dream a reality. I had no big investors, no safety net, and no guaranteed success. It was just me, my drive, and a vision of something bigger. I was terrified, but I was also excited. The prospect of creating something from the ground up, something that was truly mine, gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I started small, way smaller than I'd imagined. It wasn't glamorous. I didn't have an office or even a team at the beginning. I worked out of my living room surrounded by kids' toys and laundry that never seemed to end. I didn't have the luxury of hiring experts or consultants. It was just me, figuring things out as I went along. I took every free online course I could find on digital marketing, e-commerce, and social media. I stayed up late, watching tutorials on YouTube, practicing what I learned the next day, and slowly building the foundation for my business. But building something from scratch isn't just about learning new skills. It's about facing the crushing doubts that creep in when things get tough. There were times when I thought about giving up, when the technical side of the business seemed overwhelming, when sales didn't come in as fast as I hoped, or when I felt like I was failing my kids because I was so wrapped up in building my dream. Those moments were hard, and there were plenty of them. I was constantly asking myself if I had made a huge mistake, if this was all just a fantasy that would never materialize. But the alternative, remaining stuck in a life that wasn't mine, was worse. So I kept pushing. I reached out to anyone who could help, sought mentorship from women who had built businesses from nothing, and kept learning from my mistakes. Slowly, I began to see some traction. My online store, which had started with just a handful of products, began to grow. Sales trickled in, then snowballed. What had started as a side hustle, something I did late at night after my kids went to bed, was slowly becoming a legitimate business. I began to realize something powerful. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was creating something that could change my life forever. The real turning point came when I secured my first big client. It wasn't a huge company, but it was enough to give me the validation I needed. It was proof that my hard work was paying off. That client's positive feedback sparked something in me. It told me that what I was doing wasn't just a dream. It was a business that could scale. With that client came referrals, and soon I was able to hire a small team to help me manage the growing workload. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control. This wasn't just about making ends meet anymore. This was about building an empire. As the business grew, I began to focus on the bigger picture. I wanted my brand to stand for more than just a product. I wanted it to represent empowerment, resilience, and the idea that anyone, no matter their circumstances, could create their own success. I started using my story as a way to connect with my customers. I wasn't just selling a product, I was selling a vision. I wanted women, especially single mothers like me, to see that it was possible to rise above the challenges, to create something that didn't depend on anyone else's approval, and to build a future that was theirs to control. With every success, every new partnership, and every milestone I hit, I became more convinced that I was on the right path. But with that success came new challenges. The more the business grew, the more complex it became. Suddenly, I wasn't just managing my store. I was overseeing marketing, finances, employee relations, and customer service. The pressure to keep up with the demands of running a growing business started to weigh on me. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, when I doubted my ability to lead, and when I wondered if I was spreading myself too thin. But in those moments of doubt, I remembered the reason I started all this in the first place. I had a family to support, and I wasn't going to let them down. I had already been knocked down once by someone who should have been there for me, and I refused to let that define me. Every obstacle, every setback was just another chance to prove that I could do this on my own. I had no other option but to keep moving forward. As the business continued to grow, I reinvested everything back into it. I focused on scaling, refining my processes, and expanding my product range. And soon, my brand began to attract attention. I got featured in small publications, then bigger ones, and before I knew it, I was getting offers to collaborate with influencers and industry leaders. The momentum built quickly, and the business that had once seemed like a small side project began to take on a life of its own. There were moments when I had to pinch myself, to remind myself of how far I had come. From sitting in my living room, unsure of how to make this work, to managing $1 million business, it felt surreal. But the journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I had finally begun to create the life I'd always dreamed of, and it was all happening because I refused to let anyone, least of all Jake, define what my future could look like. I had built this on my own, and I wasn't stopping now. As my business continued to soar, there were moments when I felt like I was living a dream. On the outside, everything looked perfect. I was a successful entrepreneur, making more money than I had ever imagined, and my children were thriving. But behind the scenes, the pressure of balancing my rapidly growing business with motherhood was beginning to take its toll. Running a company wasn't as glamorous as it seemed. The late nights, the endless meetings, the constant decisions that had to be made, all while making sure my kids had their dinner, did their homework, and felt loved and supported, became a heavy burden. I was often running on fumes, struggling to keep all the plates spinning. Some days, I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. Other days, I felt like I was doing everything wrong, that I wasn't giving enough to my children, my business, or myself. I remember one particular evening, as I sat in my office working late yet again, I looked at the clock and realized it was well past midnight. My kids had long been asleep, and the house was quiet. The weight of the day hung over me, and I felt a pang of guilt in my chest. I had been so focused on scaling my business and keeping everything running smoothly that I hadn't had a meaningful conversation with Noah or Emma all day. I had missed out on reading them their bedtime stories, the little moments that used to feel so sacred to me. In that moment, I questioned if this success was worth it. Was the empire I was building worth sacrificing the time and memories I could be creating with my children? It wasn't just my time with them that I was sacrificing. I was sacrificing my own well-being. I wasn't taking care of myself physically or emotionally. I was running on pure determination, but I wasn't stopping to rest or recharge. I wasn't sleeping enough, wasn't eating properly, and didn't even remember the last time I took a real break. My business was thriving, but I felt like I was crumbling inside. The turning point came when I collapsed from exhaustion one morning. I had pushed myself too hard for too long, and my body just gave out. I woke up in a hospital bed, connected to an IV, feeling more vulnerable than I ever had before. It was a wake-up call. In my pursuit of success, I had neglected my health, my relationships, and the things that truly mattered. I had been so focused on proving myself, on showing the world and Jake that I could succeed without him, that I forgot the importance of balance. The doctor's words echoed in my mind as I left the hospital that day. You can't pour from an empty cup. That was the harsh truth I needed to hear. I'd been so focused on building my business and proving my worth that I had lost sight of the things that gave me strength, my family, my health, and my peace of mind. When I returned home, I took a long, hard look at my life and my priorities. I knew I needed to make some serious changes. I couldn't keep running at full speed without slowing down to take care of myself. I needed to delegate more, to trust my team, and to set boundaries between work and personal life. Most importantly, I needed to be present for my children. They were growing up so fast, and I didn't want to miss out on their lives, just like I had missed those precious moments earlier. I began to restructure my business, hiring more people to handle the day-to-day operations. I set strict work hours and made it a point to stop working when the kids were home, no matter how much was left on my to-do list. I started prioritizing self-care, taking time to exercise, eat well, and get enough sleep. I also carved out time to spend with my kids, whether it was playing board games, reading stories, or just talking about their day. I realized that success wasn't just about growing a business. It was about growing as a person, as a mother, and as a leader. And I needed to take care of all parts of myself, not just the business. The changes I made didn't happen overnight, but over time, I started to feel more balanced. I was still ambitious, still driven, but I was also more present. My business continued to thrive, but now I had time for the things that mattered most. I didn't have to sacrifice my personal life for my professional success. I could have both. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when I felt overwhelmed by the demands of both my business and my family. But the difference was that now I had the tools, the mindset, and the support system to handle it all. I had learned the hard way that I couldn't do it all on my own. I had to ask for help, delegate, and trust others, both in my business and in my personal life. As I began to find this balance, I noticed something incredible. I became more effective in both areas. My productivity at work increased, my relationships with my children deepened, and I finally began to feel like I was living a life that was both successful and fulfilling. I had created the life I always dreamed of, not just a business, but a balanced, meaningful life that I could be proud of. And as I looked at the empire I had built, I realized that success wasn't about the money, the fame, or the recognition. It was about finding peace in the chaos, about knowing that I was doing what I loved while also being there for the people who mattered most. It was about showing my children that they could follow their dreams and create their own success without losing themselves in the process. And above all, it was about proving to myself that I could have it all without sacrificing what truly mattered. As my life began to settle into a rhythm of balance, something unexpected happened. Success wasn't just about the new business, the wealth, or even the recognition. It became about something deeper: healing. The road I had traveled, from the heartache of Jake's abandonment to building an empire of my own, had been a transformative journey, but one I hadn't fully processed. I had poured so much energy into my work, proving myself to the world and to Jake, that I never fully dealt with the emotions that had accompanied his departure. It was only when my business began to thrive and I started feeling more at peace with myself that I could no longer ignore the unresolved anger, hurt, and resentment that still lingered. Jake had left me and our kids behind without a second thought, and though I had created something extraordinary in his absence, I hadn't truly confronted the emotional wreckage he had left behind. I had built an empire, yes, but I had never truly built a bridge to the part of me that still clung to the betrayal. Every time I thought about him, my blood would boil, and it was then that I realized this anger was consuming me. I couldn't move forward completely until I faced it head on, but the idea of confronting Jake after everything he had done to us felt impossible. I had convinced myself that I didn't need closure, that I could simply move on and create a new life without him. But I was wrong. In order to heal, I had to make peace with the past. And so I decided to confront Jake, not for him, but for me. I needed to look him in the eye and tell him how he had hurt me, how his abandonment had changed everything, and how I had learned to rebuild a life without him. I didn't know if he would ever understand or care, but I knew that I needed this for my own sense of closure. I couldn't keep carrying the weight of that anger if I wanted to fully embrace the future. I reached out to Jake, expecting him to resist or deny the conversation, but to my surprise, he agreed. I was filled with a mix of dread and anticipation. Would this bring peace, or would it just open old wounds? When we met, I saw him for the first time in years. He looked different, older, more worn down. He didn't have the same confidence he once did. As I sat across from him, I couldn't help but feel a small pang of relief. He wasn't the man I had put on a pedestal all those years. He was just a man, a flawed one, at that. The conversation was tense at first. He apologized, but his words felt hollow. He expressed regret for the way things had turned out, but it was clear that his apology wasn't out of genuine remorse. It was because he could see that I had moved on, that I had created something bigger than what he ever thought possible for me. But that didn't matter anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't waiting for him to fix the past. I was there to take back control of my own narrative. I let him know how his actions had impacted me, how I had to find strength I didn't even know I had just to keep going. I told him how, in his absence, I had become someone I didn't recognize at first, but someone I was proud of now. I wasn't angry with him anymore. I was just sad for him, sad that he had chosen a path of self-destruction while I had chosen a path of growth. I told him that while I was grateful for the lessons I had learned, I wasn't going to allow him to be a part of my life again. Jake didn't argue. He didn't try to defend himself. He simply nodded, his face full of regret. The conversation ended quietly, and I walked away knowing I had done what I needed to do. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was that I had finally released the hold his abandonment had on me. I wasn't just building an empire in business, I was now building a life free of the chains that once bound me to him. That meeting marked a turning point for me. It wasn't just the business that was thriving now, it was my soul. I had stopped letting the pain of the past dictate my future. And with that release came a sense of freedom I hadn't even realized I was missing. The anger and resentment that had fueled my drive were now replaced with a renewed sense of purpose. I began to focus on creating something greater than myself, something that could leave a lasting impact. With my business booming and the burden of my past lifted, I turned my attention to philanthropy. I wanted to give back, not just financially, but through the experiences I had lived. I created programs for women who had been through similar hardships: single mothers, abandoned wives, those who felt trapped by circumstances. I knew the pain they were going through because I had been there. And now I wanted to help them see that they too could rise above the chaos and build their own futures. My story became a testament to resilience, and I wanted to share it with as many people as possible. I wasn't just an entrepreneur anymore. I was a mentor, a leader, a voice for women who had been told they were incapable, unsupported, or unheard. I used my platform to inspire others, to show them that they too could build something of their own, even when it felt impossible. As I reflected on how far I had come, I realized something powerful. My journey wasn't just about proving Jake wrong or about the money. It was about reclaiming my life, my choices, my worth, and my power. The financial success was just a byproduct of something much deeper. I had found my purpose, and it had nothing to do with what Jake thought of me or the life I had built. I had done it all on my own, and that was the greatest victory of all. Looking back on everything, it's hard to believe how much has changed. There was a time when I felt like I was trapped, hopeless, and lost, stuck in the wreckage of a life I thought I was building with Jake. But that version of me feels like a distant memory now. The woman who once clung to the idea of family and the security of a traditional marriage is gone. In her place is someone stronger, more determined, and more self-aware than I ever thought possible. When I started this journey, I was driven by a desire to prove everyone wrong, especially Jake. But as the years went by, I began to realize that the real victory wasn't just in building $1 million business or watching my ex-husband struggle. It was in rediscovering who I was and who I wanted to become. It was about understanding that my worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. It was never about making Jake regret his decision. It was about creating a life that I could be proud of, a life where I had control, where I could shape my own destiny. The business I built was a symbol of my transformation. It wasn't just a financial success, it was the manifestation of everything I had learned along the way. The lessons I had learned about perseverance, about the importance of believing in myself, about the power of resilience. I realized that my journey wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in the face of adversity, about embracing my power and stepping into my own light. And the most beautiful part was that I could now share those lessons with others. The brand I created has become more than just a business. It's a movement. It's a reminder that no matter where you start, no matter how many times you get knocked down, you have the ability to rebuild, to rise up, and to create something extraordinary. I now speak at conferences, share my story with women who are going through what I went through, and help others see that they are capable of so much more than they ever thought possible. I've built a platform where women can feel empowered, supported, and encouraged to take control of their own lives. The legacy I'm building is not just in dollars or clients, it's in the lives I've touched and the change I've helped create in others. My children, Noah and Emma, are thriving. They've seen firsthand the strength and determination it takes to create your own future. They've watched me grow from someone who was heartbroken and unsure to someone who stands tall, proud of what she's accomplished. I hope they see that success isn't just about money or status. It's about staying true to yourself, believing in your abilities, and never giving up, no matter how tough things get. There are moments when I think about Jake and the life we could have had. I think about the man he was and the man he chose to become, and I can't help but feel sad for him. He's still struggling, still lost in the decisions he made, and I know that he'll never experience the peace and fulfillment that I have found. That's not my problem anymore. My life has moved beyond him. I've created a new narrative, one that I am proud of. Jake might have left us once, but I've learned to embrace the freedom that came with that abandonment. I've learned to live for myself, to lead with intention, and to create a life on my own terms. The mistakes of the past no longer define me, and I will never let them again. The truth is, I am so much better off now. I am stronger than I ever was with him, and I am creating a future for myself and my children that is built on resilience, self-love, and the unwavering belief that we are worthy of everything we desire. If someone had told me back then, as I sat alone in that empty house, broken and lost, that I would be where I am today, I would never have believed it. But now, I stand here, a living testament to the power of determination, the power of believing in your own strength. I'm not just a survivor of my circumstances, I'm the architect of my own success. And for the first time in a long time, I can finally say that I'm not just okay. I'm more than okay. I'm thriving. I'm building a legacy. And the best part is, I did it all on my own. Jake may have abandoned me, but I found something far more valuable than his approval. I found myself, and no one can take that away.